to another episode of the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast. This is the 5th episode in the series. In this session, I'm not going to be interviewing anybody. I just want to explore a subject that I have a lot of attention on and I think might be really helpful. As you know, from early on in the podcast series, I was describing what I believe healthy masculinity to be. And I defined it as having a strong and robust personal moral compass and then having the courage to live by it. And so there's two pathways there. One, there's the development of that moral compass. And the other, of course, is developing the courage to be able to follow that moral compass. And it's a journey. It's not easy. Even people who are well-educated, who have done a lot of work, who are very evolved, even they have trouble sometimes really following their moral compass because the decision required at the time is challenging. So I want to start today by talking about decisions because I reckon that it's one of the subjects that nobody really sort of takes much time to sit and contemplate and really understand what a decision is. Now, I have a little bit of an analogy that I like to use, so I'm going to use it now, and I'm talking directly to you. So imagine that one day, maybe you were 25 years of age and you had this urge to go to India for a holiday. You don't know why you had such an interest in India, but it really piqued your curiosity, and everywhere you turned, you seemed to be reminded of India, and you would think about it a lot, and you would be looking at things on the internet. And anyway, one day you wake up after a dream, and maybe it's a dream where you dreamt something about India, and you sort of woke up and thought, damn, I've got to do this. I really need to go to India. And you think to yourself, yep, I'm going to do that. So you're ringing your mum and dad and you say, guess what, mum and dad, I've decided I'm going to go to India. I really need to do it. I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to spend 6 months backpacking in India. And your dad might say something to you like, well, yeah, I can understand the adventure. It'd be really exciting, but wouldn't it be better if you stayed? You've got a really good job. Hang in there for another 3 or 4 years, accumulate some leave. Then when you go, you can use that leave and then you've got a good stable job to come back to because your dad's concerned about your stability. And then your mum might get on the phone and she might have some other perspectives and she might share with you that she would feel anxious of you being in a strange country on your own. And then as the day goes on, you talk to a few other people and maybe you talk to your boss and your boss says, well, that's it. If you're going to do that, the job's over, you're out. We can't afford to be waiting around for people to go off and go on their own adventures. And you might speak to a couple of friends and they might endorse it and say, yeah, you should do this, go for it, yeah. And then at the end of the day, after you've had all these perspectives from people, you sit and think to yourself, man, I'm a fool. I'm so stupid, like it's not the right time. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be having fantasies like this. I've got to be more responsible. And so in that moment, you dismiss the idea of going to India. But what you then notice over the next couple of weeks is that you're a bit grumpy, you're a bit reactive, and you're not happy. And the reason for that is probably because you didn't follow your heart and you didn't make a decision. You let your circumstances decide for you, which means you felt powerless. Now let's rewind it. Let's just say you woke up after that dream and you decided, I'm doing this. Started up the computer, jumped online, went to cheap flights or Expedia or something like that, hunted down some good flights to Delhi and booked them and paid for them. And then you went searching for a week's accommodation in perhaps a backpacker hostel in Delhi, and you booked that and paid for that too, knowing that you'd work out the rest of the accommodation later. Then you open up your email and start writing an email. Dear boss, thank you so much. It's been wonderful working with you. I've learned so much. but I've got this bee in my bonnet and I've just got to do it. So I'm giving you 2 weeks notice and I'm going to be leaving. I'm going to go to India for 6 months. And I'm really sorry, but I've just got to do this. Send. Now the decision is made. You decided and you took action. Now when you ring your mum and dad, they have to respond to you because you say to them, guess what, mum and dad? I'm going to India. Flights are booked. I've resigned from work, got some accommodation booked, and I can't wait. I'm leaving on the 16th. Now they've got to respond to you. And your boss might even come and say something to you like, wow, I'm sorry to see you go, but I understand. Thanks for the notice. Make sure you drop in and see us when you get back. And I've seen that happen before. And you see the difference between the two is you decided. You didn't choose between options. You just decided. And you see, oftentimes in life, people think they've made a decision, but they've actually just chosen between 2 options. Now, what happens if you're given 2 options and neither of them is favourable? Do you just go for one of them to stay as comfortable as you can? Or do you make a decision? Now, a brilliant case in point here is those people during the pandemic who just did not want to take the vaccine, for example. They might have been working in emergency services. I've got a really good friend, and he was told to stay in the job, you've got to be vaccinated. And you can't keep working if you're not vaccinated. And he just sat there and he thought, what do I do? I've got a choice. I either get fired or I take the vaccine. And he didn't want to get fired and he didn't want to take the vaccine. So he was stuck with a choice. So what he then did was make a decision. I do not want to work for an employer that does this to an employee. So he resigned and started a plan to build a new career. So decisions are really, really interesting. And, you know, I often quote Harry Palmer because he's my biggest teacher. His materials taught me so much experientially about my consciousness and how to support other people with their consciousness. And developing a strong moral compass is really all about navigating and managing our own consciousness. And Harry put this beautiful quote. He said that freedom is a measure of the number of decisions a person makes. As long as there is more pleasure than pain connected with making decisions, the person desires more freedom and less indoctrination. When it is reversed and there is more pain than pleasure connected with making decisions, a person desires less freedom and welcomes indoctrination. So when we look at making decisions, it's really an act of will. Have we got the strength of willpower to actually stand in our own space and decide? Now, oftentimes when we're in a situation where we're not quite sure what to do, we do need to make a decision. And the problem is, if we haven't got certainty of the outcome, then we're in an unknown and there's risk. And that can be incredibly uncomfortable. So that is where the courage part comes in. Because sometimes we have to have the courage to make the decision and cope with whatever the outcome is. So waking up our will is a huge thing. And I think that what's happened in our society because of wealth and because of comfort and because of an avoidance of discomfort and avoidance of pain, a lot of people have lost any real grunt in the strength of their will. And so they're living their life just responding to their circumstances, responding to temptations, to urges, to addictions, and not really navigating their own life. Some years ago, I was driving through Western Australia in the outback, And the young guy that was driving the car, he was a safety manager for a company, and he's a former military man. And we were talking about this. It was an amazing discussion. And he was telling me that when he was up in up in Townsville at the army base up there, he was saying that oftentimes when soldiers came back from either active service or an extended military exercise, they would often find soldiers standing in the supermarket just staring at shelves. And they'd be standing there almost catatonic. The reason they were like that is because they couldn't decide. They might have been looking at a rack full of biscuits, for example, and they couldn't make a decision about which packet of biscuits to buy. And the reason for that was that their will was totally asleep because they'd been living in circumstances where other people were making all their decisions for them and telling them what to do and when to do it, moment to moment. And so these people come back from these exercises or from active service and they have no capacity to decide for themselves. And I've been told it takes 2 to 3 weeks of quarantining to get these people back to the point where their will can be woken up enough so that they can make a decision. Quite incredible, isn't it? You know, and Harry Palmer created an incredible table. And if ever you want to see it, you can download public domain, the will mini course. It's determination mini course on the Avatar website. And in the table, in the will table, he sort of lays it out as to all these realms of will. There's instinctive, emotional, moral, self-determined, and the final one is transcendent. And it's amazing to look at the table and see what's happening with the human will. Now, he looks at, the motivational forces for the will at each level and how the will is expressed and what the being is most concerned with at the time. And at the instinctive will level, that's very sort of animal, I suppose. And he looks at the motivating forces there, and it's basically survival stuff like hunger, shelter, and reproduction. And what the being is most concerned with is staying alive, not dying. And the will is really expressed, through simple things like reactions to things and irresistible tendencies. That's quite amazing. And when you look at animals, how they react, that's pretty much it. They eat when they're hungry, they procreate when the time comes, they sleep a lot, and they take care of their own safety. The next level of the will up is the emotional will, and I found this one interesting. So the motivating force in this level of the will is desires and cravings, habits, aversions, addictions. And it's when a person's operating in this level of will, it's very reactive will. So they're reacting to things like things they desire or things that they've got aversions to or things that they're craving, things that they're, reacting to their habitual desires or urges or addictions. And the will's expressed through basically impulses and attitudes, moods, self-sabotage. And what the being is most concerned with in this space is feeling good and not feeling bad. The next level of the will up is the moral will. And the motivating force here is moral codes, doctrines, and convictions. Oftentimes that's where you find very religious people or people who are very adherent to some sort of code. How the will is expressed, self-restraint, criticism, praise, and punishment. There's a lot of right and wrong in it. And what the being's most concerned with is being right, not being seen to be wrong, and being seen to be good and not being seen to be bad or evil. Then the next level up is really interesting. It's a self-determined will. And the motivating force here is challenges, purposes, and goals. And how the will's expressed is through efforts, plans, and commitment to those plans, committing to a goal. And what the being is most concerned with is admiration and acquiring, achieving, not failing. Now, this is a really interesting one because I think that at some point along the line, perhaps it really started to happen in the 80s, where we started to get this quest for wealth and quest for success. And so there's an enormous amount of a desire for admiration, achieving, winning, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it became an obsession, and you still see it today when you scroll through Instagram. There's constantly commercials about how to get rich quick and how to be successful and all that sort of stuff. And it's really the game of acquiring status to win some sort of invisible competition. But the thing I've learned over time is that if you haven't done the work to integrate and grow through those other realms of will, the instinctive will, the emotional will, which is the place of tantrums and guilt trips and all that sort of thing, through the intensity of the moral will. And if you haven't integrated your way through those and you're trying to live in the self-determined will and make your decisions from there, first, your decisions are going to be affected by whichever realm of will you're stuck in. And secondly, every time you hit discouragement or failure or fatigue, you're likely to slip back down and embarrass yourself in the other realm of the will that you haven't moved through yet. And see, part of the path here in developing that good, strong moral code is getting the guidance and the support to move through those realms, those lower realms of the will, to step up into the higher realms where you can be a really deeply conscientious person who can take notice of their life and make decisions that are based on the best for them and who they want to become. Now, I don't know whether there's much work available out there in the world that really helps people with. Some people get support with therapy. I know when I was younger and I had some challenges in my life, I would go and see a therapist for a couple of weeks, have a few conversations, try and work through it, get clarity on it and move on in my life, and eventually I found the avatar work and got extraordinary support through that. But the challenge is that in this modern world, when you get up into that self-determined will area, sometimes because of that desire for status and success and that fear of failure, we start pretending to be something that we're not. And that level of pretense means we develop a pretty big ego, and that ego is going to fight against any effort to improve. So we get stuck in that place of trying to pretend to be the person that we would like to be instead of actually doing the work to get there. And the reality is there's no shortcuts. There's just not. That's all there is to it. Now, some people are really lucky because they grow up in really good homes. They get exposed to really good parents, really good mentors, a good schooling system because they got some good teachers who help them craft that way through that to stabilize them in those higher realms of will where they could really make decisions based on their intuitive sense of what is right. But that's a few people. And you see, in our society, I think we've forgotten to value that. If you've done any reading ever about Indigenous populations, American Indians, Australian Aborigines, and other cultures from around the world, there was a big part of the growth of young people to develop them to become good and decent and strong human beings. It was a pathway, and it was something, for example, that a young man took great pride in, to become a really strong, courageous leader within the tribe or within the group that made their decisions based on what was good for everybody and was not about personal gain. But in our population, it seems to have disappeared. We don't celebrate those things anymore. There's not this yearning for adolescent boys to find out how they can take the steps into becoming a really well accepted and mature and strong adult male. In February last year, I went to a friend of mine's son's bat mitzvah. And I've got to tell you, it was such a beautiful experience. I'd never been to one before. I didn't really understand what they were. But this young lad, I knew him quite well, and he worked and worked and worked. He had to prepare for over a year of study for his bat mitzvah. And on the day, he stepped up and he had such important things to do, and he had to, to chant and sing from the Torah. And it was amazing. And all these men, his father and these other men, got around him, and the love that surrounded that boy as he took that journey, that really courageous step to do these things on his own, solo. I had tears in my eyes. I couldn't believe it. It was so profound. And I thought, wow, that's the men getting around the boys and welcoming them into manhood and working with them to teach them really good values. Now, you might look at that and say, well, that's religious indoctrination. Well, maybe there's a part of that, but it didn't feel like it on the day to me. This was about him as a human being learning how to step up and grow. So we're back to healthy masculinity, and we're back to making decisions. Sometimes decisions are so hard, and we look for somebody else to give us an option that we didn't have so we can find an easy way out. And that's just part of being human. But the problem is, it's never going to solve the issue. We actually need to decide. And in any situation, if we're really true to ourselves and we've actually just stop and be honest with ourselves, we can feel what we need to do. And then comes the fear. Sometimes that challenge is as simple as speaking the truth. That's it. I can't tell you the number of times I lied to my parents, or I lied to my wife because I was too scared to be honest. I'm a 6'4", 110 kilogram man, and I was too scared. I wasn't scared out in the football field, but taking those moments to dig inside and be brutally honest, knowing that there could be some incredible backlash, I just wasn't up for it. And I learned some brutal lessons out of that. Because when you lie to somebody, they know that you lied. That's all there is to it. So this is my call to you. How do you step into being a really honest person in your life? Being really honest with yourself, and in those moments where a decision needs to be made, really feeling what it is that you need to do. And then recognizing what the fear is that might come up and whether you've got the courage to decide based on what you know is the right thing to do. And in that moment, when you do decide, things change. And I was once given a beautiful piece of advice by one of my mentors in the Avatar course, a beautiful guy who's a lot younger than me. So I was taking advice from a much younger man. And he said to me, you know, John, when you make a decision that's based on what you feel within the depths of your moral compass, it always ends in a really good place. And he was so right. So what do we do? You know, I was in Fiji back in June, and I went over there for about a 6-day holiday. Then I was going to a conference. And I was just having a really good rest. I was doing some training, I was doing a lot of reading, and I was sleeping a lot, and just really enjoying taking my time. And one morning I was sitting at the back of the bar. I'd been training and I was having a cup of coffee. It's a beautiful cup of coffee. And I heard all this yelling, incredible yelling. And I looked up and there was a Fijian man running up the beach in a pair of shorts, no top. He was very lean and muscular, and he was carrying something in his hand. It looked like an axe or something like that. I found out later on it was a cane knife. And there was a bunch of about 10 or 12 other men chasing him, and they were yelling him. And as he got closer, I could see that there was blood streaming down his face. And I knew this was bad. And, you know, Fiji, after the pandemic, is a very stressed place. The tourism really got decimated, and people have got no money. And he turned and ran up the side road alongside the cafe bar where I was sitting at the back. And I knew he was in trouble. And I just had a moment and I thought, nobody else is going to help this guy. So I put my coffee down and I ran up the side of the cafe. And as I was running up, the other guys, I could see them running up the road just adjacent to me. And I came around the front and this man was cowering in the corner, blood streaming down his face. And these guys came around the corner and they were like a pack of wild animals. You know, decision point, right? But somebody had to care for that man. So I just stepped in front of him and I looked at the guys and I said, not today, guys. It's not happening today. And they started to yell, he needs to be punished, what he did. I said, yep, but not today. It's not happening today. And I just stood my ground. And I've got to admit, I was pretty nervous, but I had to stand my ground. I had no choice because I knew that somebody had to intervene. And after a couple of minutes, a couple of big Fijian men came and they were well dressed. And I could see they knew what was going on. They're pretty smart. And they started to talk to the guy. And then I went over and talked to the other guys and said, what happened? Why are you chasing this guy? And they said, because he molested a girl down the beach, a tourist. I went, oh, right. So once I knew that the guy was safe, and I went back to the beach and I saw a couple of women walking along with a young girl in between them, and she seemed a bit upset. And I went over and she sat down and I asked if it was her, and she said yes, and checked that she was okay. Organised to get a cup of tea for her, and I said, do you mind if I ask what happened? And she said, oh, he just came up and started talking to me. That was it. I said, did you feel threatened? And she said, no, not at all. But you see, they're so reactive on the island, they don't want any incidents with tourists at all. And these other men took a leap in their assessment of the situation and thought that this man was interfering with this young girl. So in the end, I had to follow through and make sure that the police, when they arrived, took care of the young girl, and that they also made sure to take that man home. They had to drive him home, because if he had to walk, he probably would have gotten attacked again. See, it's not convenient. The world calls upon us sometimes to step up and play a role. And I was just glad that everybody was safe. But it could be you sometime where you need to step up and do something. Now, it doesn't have to be as grand as that, because sometimes it can be just something as simple as hearing people being abusive to another person. Maybe you're still at school and you see some kids bullying another kid. As soon as you see it, it's yours. There's no way out. And the thing is, if you see it and you don't do anything, you're going to hate yourself. And that's degrading. And the last thing I want anybody to do who's following this podcast is to degrade yourself by being a coward. So sometimes you just got to suck in some breath. Now, sure, you might be very big and the people doing the bullying might be big. So you might have to go and round up some support, but get into action, do something to make sure that everybody is cared for. That's how it works. And this is the path, because every time I know this from myself, every time I've followed my moral code and I made a good decision and I stepped through my fear, my self-confidence grew, my self-acceptance grew, and I felt better about myself. And now it's easier and easier. Now, I'm not going to say there won't be a time where something will come along that will scare the shit out of me. I'm expecting that might happen at some point. But still, I know I have to stand in what I know, what I feel, and make a decision. So I ask you in your life, have you got some difficult things that you've been putting off and you're choosing the comfort route or the no drama route, but you actually really do need to stand up and handle something? It could be a difficulty at work. It could be a problem in your relationship. It could be something that's happening in your community. It could be something about yourself. Perhaps you know that there's something that's not right with your health and you're ignoring it and you're fearful of going to get it checked because the news might be bad. So you already know that you need to go and you're avoiding it. There's no courage in that. But whatever it is, if there's some difficult conversations you need to have and you know and you're avoiding them, you've got to make a decision. Because I'll tell you now, if you have got those things running in your life, I'll bet my bottom dollar you've got anxiety as well. And that's no fun. Anxiety grinds you down. It grinds your health and your well-being down. And what's standing between you and resolving your anxiety is the courage to make a decision. Now, before I continue on with the content for this podcast, I just want to revisit the will table for a few moments. During this podcast, I've talked about people who have had it tough, who have been in difficult situations. I talked about the workers who were in employment situations who felt like they were in a difficult situation that perhaps related to governments issuing mandates around vaccinations. And I talked about the people in Fiji who found themselves in a really difficult situation because tourism dropped right off during the pandemic and jobs disappeared and people had no money. And I also talked about people in the military who find themselves in situations where they're sent off to military exercise, or they're actually sent off to live warfare situations. And they're put in a situation where they're living under a chain of command for an extended period of time. And when they come back, they've lost their capacity to make decisions. They've lost control of their will. And we look at all these people and other people, and we know what it feels like to be in a difficult situation. And it's easy to feel sorry for people. It's easy to feel sympathy for them because they're in a tough situation. And we all know what it's like ourselves to find ourselves in a situation where we feel like we're a bit powerless, or we're out of options, or we're not sure what to do. But the thing is, if we feel sympathy for people, then we are sort of not empowering them to move forward and move their way out of their situation. But what's even more the case is that when we find ourselves in those situations and we feel at the effect of something. We feel at the effect of a person. We feel at the effect of our circumstances. We feel at the effect of things that are going on in the world, and we feel like we're in difficulty. If we can't move out of that place, then we end up in blame. And we all know what it feels like to be in blame. We all know what that feels like. To be blaming somebody else, to be blaming our circumstances, to be blaming events. And you see, while we're in blame, we're stuck. We're completely stuck and we can't move forward. I've known of times when I've been in blame and I've felt really righteous, so righteous that I actually felt good, but my blame did not move me forward. So it's a really interesting area to explore. And going back to the will table, we can really have a look at this and understand what's happening to us when we find ourselves in a situation where we're stuck in blame. You see, what happens to us when we get into that place is that we've forgotten to take responsibility for our own decisions. For example, people who join the military know that they're stepping into an environment where there is a chain of command. Now, at the top of that chain of command is probably the Prime Minister of Australia, if you're an Australian, that is. But it goes all the way down through all the different ranks in the military. And if you're a foot soldier, well, you're right there at the bottom, subject to the rules and the fact that you're signing on to obey orders. So even if those orders are seemingly unfair or leave you in a bad position, it was still your decision to sign on for that. Same thing when we join employment. There's certain things that we know about the employment, and there's certain things we know about how governments operate that we step into, and sometimes those things end up in a place where it's not in our favour. Now, that's okay, but where it goes wrong is when we start to slip into blame. Now, I talked to you about the Fijians, for example, and said how because of tourism, they've got no money. And I must admit, I felt really sorry for the Fijian people. But me feeling sorry for them doesn't help them. Because at the end of the day, if they're sitting there angry about what's happened and they're blaming the world, blaming the doctors, blaming the government, blaming America, whatever, whoever they might want to blame, then they're stuck. And you know where we're stuck when we're in that place? We're stuck in those lower realms of the will, the instinctive will, the emotional will, the moral will. And we can't get access to the higher realms of the will. So what does it take then? Well, I was contemplating this and having a conversation about it and with a mentor, and I got some clarity around it. And, when there's a plant, maybe a flower, that gets blocked from receiving sun, it then changes its path and it finds a way to get access to the sunlight. It's really amazing how plants do that. And we're the same. When we're in a situation like my friend who found himself stuck between two choices that he didn't want. One was to take a vaccine that he didn't want to take. And, everybody's got their beliefs about the vaccine. This is not a conversation about whether the vaccine was right or wrong or good or bad. But just in his personal situation, he didn't want to have it. And the other option, which he didn't want, was to be sacked. So he could either sit there blaming his employer and getting stuck, or he could rise up into a higher realm and take responsibility for himself and decide what he wanted to do. And so that's what he chose. He decided, well, maybe it's time for me to start a new career. And so he then resigned from his role and moved on to create something new. Now, this is where the really interesting challenge is for all of us. This is where we grow and evolve. Have we got the ability to find ourselves in a position where we feel stuck and we believe that it's somebody else's fault, or we're stuck in circumstance and we're pointing the finger and we're blaming and we're complaining? Have we got the ability to say, hang on a minute, how else can I view this? Can I adopt another perspective? Can I find a way to be more flexible in my thinking so that I can make a choice where I can move beyond this situation? At the end of the day, that's our responsibility. That's how we grow, and that's how we keep moving forward in our lives. And we stop ourselves from getting stuck. So the red flag here is blame. Whenever you feel like you're blaming, then really you're not owning your situation. You're not taking responsibility for the fact that somehow you got yourself in this situation, and now it's your job to get yourself out. Now, I want to be clear here too. You're not blaming yourself. You don't need to go down to blame. It's just a matter of realizing, wow, I decided to take on this role. And I knew that there could be times where I might feel powerless. I was a willing participant in this employment contract. I was a willing participant in this relationship. Okay. So now what am I going to do? How can I access a broader perspective so that I can find a new direction for myself and move beyond this limitation? This is the great challenge of life. And if we do it with curiosity and interest and a lot of compassion, it's going to be okay. You know, don't get stuck. So if you find yourself blaming, that's the time to start asking yourself some questions. Now, a final piece on this is that when you are taking that step to do what you need to do and you're feeling the nervousness and the fear, nobody ever said you have to look like Cool Hand Luke or Batman. You don't have to look cool. Just do it. Yeah, that's all it takes. And I promise you, it will get you into a good place. Now, if you are curious and you feel like you're stuck down in that realm of animal consciousness and you've got a lot of attention on sex and perhaps you're drinking too much and you're not really contributing very much in the world, or perhaps you're losing your temper too often, you're getting angry and you're creating conflict around yourself, or perhaps you're in a situation where you find yourself being really pious and really harsh in your judgments of other people, which causes people to not like you. That just means you're stuck in some of those lower realms of the will, and you need some support to move yourself forward and get up through those realms to really get hold of your life. Because ultimately, you can move up into the higher realms of the will, up into the transcendent areas of the will, where all of your actions are motivated by good, by making the world better, by helping people, by service, through altruism, and really stepping in to take care of people who need support and eventually be the one who's helping others to step into more responsibility. Now, it's up to you. If you'd like to do more of that work, drop me a note. I can help you out with it. But in the meantime, be good to yourself. And if you screw up and you make a bad decision, or you chicken out and you back off and you don't make a decision that you need to make, okay, you failed this time. Own up to it. Go and tell somebody that you chickened out. Yeah? And then next time, give it another try. And I reckon collectively, if all of us start to celebrate that pathway of developing ourselves into becoming really good, decent, courageous human beings, I reckon we bring back, I like to call it the Anzac spirit, that capacity to make really courageous decisions based on the care and the welfare of others. So let's see what we can do. Wish you all the best. Thanks for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you in the next podcast.